Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to our RimWorld mining empire. I must say I have quite the episode in store for you today, so I hope you are all extremely excited, I hope you're ready, and most importantly, I hope that you enjoy. But without further ado, let us begin. Alright, so we're starting this episode off with some pretty shocking news. It turns out our new soldier Beyonder has fallen in love with our slave Noprix, which is a massive no-no. As you could imagine, falling in love with your subordinates is an awful thing to do within the martial service. Falling in love with slaves is a crime punishable by death. And to make matters worse, instead of keeping it to himself, he has decided to also tell Sev about this information, which unfortunately would be an awful mistake for him. Because later that night, Sev approached Captain Hawthorne in his room to inform him of what's going on. During this time, Noprix thought it would be a wonderful idea to try and visit her new lover in his bedroom. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to her, this would be the beginning of the end. After tiptoeing her way through the hallway into Beyonder's room after she entered, she was then quickly surrounded by Captain Hawthorne and 3 other soldiers, all brandishing their weapons. The captain arrested her and then took her outside into the freezing cold of night. Noprix attempted to plead with the captain and the other soldiers for her life, but unfortunately, this crime was punishable by death, and there was a blood debt to be paid. The soldiers opened fire on Noprix, hitting her several times and then knocking her to the ground in the freezing snow. As she lay there in her own blood, screams of anguish and agony filled the night, until with one bullet, the captain silenced her screams, and she was gone. With this awful deed committed, there was but one thing left to consider: what would be done with Beyonder. Now, Captain Hawthorne had a wonderful idea of enslaving Beyonder. That way he could take Noprix's place, and we wouldn't lose the only good cook that we had. Somebody has to fuel this colony through meals, and unfortunately, as of now, it is Beyonder, regardless of his heinous crimes. But not only would the punishment end by being enslaved, we would also force him to carry his lover's corpse to the pile, which honestly was just a horrible, despicable punishment that was inflicted upon him. Hawthorne may have earned the respect from his close-knit circle of soldiers, but he is truly making enemies out of the slaves. Only time will tell, though, how this will pan out for him. Now, in the meantime, he has commissioned the slaves and some of the soldiers to build a much larger room for him and his growing family. And not only would this be a much larger and more comfortable room for him, his wife, and their baby-to-be, but this would also serve as a much nicer, more spacious study for his continued research into advanced technologies. And speaking of which, Captain Hawthorne is currently working on a project that involves the study of aeronautics, the study of flight. Now, in the meantime, while the captain is studying, the slaves and the soldiers have been ordered to go out to a very small mountain near the base and begin a strip mining operation for resources. Now, the mountain was mostly composed of sandstone, not very good for defenses, but it would be perfect for furniture and things like that inside the base. Just as well, before too long, we should end up having another resource tax collector from the Marshal Service. Now, in the meantime, though, spring here in the northern mountains is extremely cold, and we didn't really get to grow enough crops for that, so we're going to need to try and substitute some of the crops with meat. So we began doing a bit of hunting. One of the largest animals that we could find was a polar bear. Now, of course, all 6 of us very easily dispatched of the polar bear, and then we began hauling its corpse all the way back home to cut it open and begin frying it up on our electric stove. Now, normally the heads of the animals that we kill we will also turn into food. But in this particular situation, we decided to mount the polar bear's head on a plank. It looks nice and pretty, and we planned on giving it to Captain Hawthorne for his baby's crib. If I were a baby and I looked up and saw that shit hanging over my head, I'd feel pretty damn safe, I'm not gonna lie. Now, some time later, we ended up having a raid of Thromboians. Now, I know what you're thinking, oh, Thromboians, we've seen this 1,000 times, let's just kick their ass and get it over with. Wrong. These are not normal Thromboians, you see. We were very perplexed by them, as there was a Thromboian Houndmaster with several armored huskies among them. Just as well, there was a chieftain among them as well. But he and the other Thromboians were not in their usual Death Squad attire or just normal Thromboian tribal attire. They were actually wearing armor. And just as well, one of them appeared to have a flaming bow and arrow. It would seem that the Thromboians are finally beginning to advance out of their tribal technology. And this advanced weaponry and armor is something that they're concocting on their own. It's not something that they've stolen or won in battle. But speaking of battles, as they began trotting towards us, of course, we began opening fire on them. They were a very chaotic and malicious force of raiders. Their flaming bow and arrow caused a lot of fires around the battleground, which also in turn caused a lot of chaos. Just as well, their huskies were everywhere and seeming to be endless, and they were just unstoppable with their armor. Luckily, though, we ended up being able to take them down with 0 casualties, though many of our people were injured. They also managed to destroy our brand new mounted machine gun that we built last episode. This truly shows the power the Thromboians are building up, I believe. Soon they will no longer be this technological backwater of Thromboians. They will be a force to be reckoned with. Truly they are already. Now maybe they're advancing in technology, but they're still filthy, dirty Thromboians. To show how dirty they are, one of their filthy dogs had scratched Captain Hawthorne on the leg and had become a festering infection. No doubt due to some type of husky or even Thromboian fecal matter. I'm sure it stepped in, the filthy animals. Those damn dirty dogs. Well, luckily though, not too long after, thanks to some good medical care and some good medicine, he did develop an immunity. Now, as mentioned previously, we've been doing quite a bit of hunting to try and sustain ourselves until the ground thaws out so we can begin growing rice and other crops once again. Now, the only issue with that, there is a scarcity of wildlife, so to survive, we're going to have to do a bit of trading with the local settlers in the area. We should, of course, let this serve as a lesson for this coming summer that we need to grow more and more crops. That way we don't have to rely on trade to try and feed our soldiers and slaves. Hawthorne and the others were simply not used to the cold of the northern mountains. There's a very short time that we can actually grow crops. Just after the caravan returned, we had realized they had bought plenty of cabbage for us all to eat, and it also looks like they had bought some cloth for us to use in some projects that the captain had in mind. Now, the first of these projects that Captain Hawthorne had in mind, you know, the slaves Happy Oak and Lurcott are very good at mining, but in the dark under the hill, it's very hard to see what you're actually mining. So he had the crafty idea to create some mining helmets for them. So he ordered Happy Oak to be the first to strap this piece of shit with a light on it onto his head and get to work. Happy Oak, of course, had to eat first, so he done that, but after he was done scarfing down some wonderful food, he actually went outside to begin mining some silver. Now, I know we called it a piece of shit a moment ago, but I only said that because Hawthorne made it. The mining helmets are actually really cool, and I really love them for the feel of this series and everything. I think they are perfect. But you know what else was perfect? The fact that Captain Hawthorne ordered Sandra to go outside, use up as many resources as it took to build 3 brand new mounted machine gun turrets. The next time those Thromboians or any filthy rebel scum show their faces, these turrets will mow them down. Now, Konar did end up going into labor, and we all scurried about to try and get prepared for that. It would appear once again it was time for our good friend and slave, Happy Oak, to deliver another child for the Empire of the Marshal Service. Thankfully as well, he had his awesome looking headlamp. That way he could see all the parts lit up very nicely to deliver the child. Unfortunately, though, the child was delivered and it was quite sickly, but that was okay as Happy Oak would use some medicine to help nurse the child back to health. Now, we did have a wonderful suggestion by our good friend Nubian Beauty, who stated that we should name the children after precious stones and minerals. Now, as you can see, we kind of discussed this a little bit, and we kind of went more on the side of minerals instead of precious stones, so we have decided to name the child Slate. Now, why slate instead of any other type of mineral? Well, this mountain is mostly composed of slate, thus, of course, I felt it a fitting name. Now, just shortly after the birth of his beautiful baby girl, Captain Hawthorne managed to finish his research into flight. And now, along with that, he has discovered a new way of flight. Now, the Marshal Service has previously came up with airplanes and whatnot, but Hawthorne has discovered something he is calling helicopters. Now, helicopters, even in this universe, are not a new idea, but by this time they've been nothing but a concept. There's never actually been a perfected prototype that functions. So Hawthorne is going to attempt with the soldiers to build a bit of a prototype scout helicopter. Now, if this helicopter design that the captain has come up with is a success, it will be a major shifting point for the Marshal Service in the war as well as day-to-day operations. The maneuverability of this helicopter versus that of the planes that the Marshal Service uses is just uncomparable. Now, we couldn't have this bangin'-ass helicopter without a nice landing pad and some roads to walk around it, so we were working on that for a little while. Not too long after that, though, we had some traders stop in. Now, these traders, of course, had many wonderful items, as they often do, and they were willing to buy plenty of leathers and whatnot from us. So, in exchange, we bought some food from them, and just as well, we also bought some fuel that we would attempt to use in our helicopter. And then, as if on cue, we had our resource tax collectors from the Marshal Service who arrived, and we prepared to bring them plenty of steel. Just as well, Hawthorne also provided them with some information about the newly acquired helicopter. They also let us know how the war effort was going. Unfortunately, it looked like one of the ironclad ships just off the coast was recently raided by rebels and destroyed. The rebels also took all the weapons and resources that the ironclad was carrying with it, unfortunately. Alas, we cannot win every single battle, but we can still win the war. Now, Severn was old enough to walk around, and he decided the first thing he would do would be to eat a raw duck egg at the table. Jesus Christ, what a sick little freak. He'll fit in perfectly here with the rest of us sociopath, fascist, dictator-like bastards. And just like my dear old dad used to say, if you're old enough to walk, you're old enough to carry a gun. I'm just kidding. I didn't know him. Now, some time later, Captain Hawthorne decided it was finally time to take the helicopter out on its maiden voyage. There was a rebel hunting site nearby, and just like we've been talking about before, we are in desperate need of food, and we're tired of having to trade and pay for it. So why not kill our enemies and get food? Two birds with one stone. The captain and Sandra flew over the small lake between us and the other mountains just before arriving at the hunting site. Now, it would appear that there were 4 hunters at this small hunting work site, but there were only 2 of us, the captain and Sandra. Luckily, though, they had the keen idea to bring a mounted machine gun along with them. We used our mounted machine gun to calmly explain to the rebels that we simply wanted food, not their life. Oh, I'm just kidding. We tore them to pieces. There were literally bits of them everywhere. It was disgusting. But now, with all the rebels dead, it would take a little bit of time because we had to have Sandra cut up all the mega sloth into meat so we could pack it all into the helicopter, along with all the heavy fur that would be much needed back home at base. And of course, after arriving back home, it would take a while to get it all brought inside. We also had Happy Oak work on some refrigerators, which were pretty good in the spring and summer for keeping things cold, but unfortunately you could only have 1 stack of meat in there at a time, but they were somewhat useful. But with all that being said, I think we can officially call Hawthorne's scout helicopter a massive success. It was perfect. Some time had passed later, and we had received a fair-sized raid of fairly well-equipped rebel soldiers from the Red Cove Bandits. This raid was personal, though. These rebels were here to seek revenge for their fallen leader Ninjak, no doubt. Among the rebels, though, we, the audience, no doubt spot some familiar faces once again. Yes, that is right, we have Shortus, the husband to the leader of the bootleggers' tree. He has also brought his son-in-law, Chet. Now, for those of you who have not watched the previous series, Chet was the lover of Lucky, who was also Shortus's daughter, who was killed by the Marshal Service, so no doubt that this battle will be very, very personal for both of them. Chet led the Demolition Men rebel towards us, but luckily we were able to easily dispatch of them. They were not planning on our mounted machine gun turrets, which destroyed the brunt of their attack. For the last time that they were here, there was simply one, but now we had three. With the raid defeated, Shortus and the remaining rebels attempted to flee our pursuing soldiers. Captain Hawthorne, pursuing Shortus, managed to shoot him in his one good leg, downing him, which was perfect because he was much more valuable to us alive than he was dead. You see, Hawthorne, being the greedy piece of shit that he is, he decided that he would keep Shortus alive so he could present him to the overall Marshal Service. That way he would gain fame and reputation, even a promotion of sorts. Even though they managed to botch keeping Chet alive, he was turned into Swiss cheese on the ground, Shortus would earn Hawthorne this reputation that he so desperately wished to mend. Because if you remember in the letter he wrote to his sister in episode 1, he was explaining that due to multiple failures throughout the war, he has been exiled here to the north to set up the mining operation, of course. The other soldiers begged Hawthorne to kill him, but he refused, of course, for his own personal reasons, because they have all heard of how dangerous Shortus was. Everyone except for the slaves, of course, who have been kept in the dark the entire time. The slaves knew very little about the war and who was actually winning, of course, but they did know how dangerous Shortus was based on his actions on the battlefield. So everyone was extremely shocked when Captain Hawthorne enslaved Shortus to present him to the Marshal Service, as the next tax collection would not be coming around for another year or so. It wouldn't matter, however, because Shortus hadn't planned on sticking around very long at all. He entered the slaves' quarters and quickly awoken Happy Oak. Happy Oak, of course, was very drowsy and wasn't very sure as to what Shortus was saying, but Shortus was frantically trying to explain that he was with Tree and Bacchus, and this was the same Tree and Bacchus that he had helped escape the logging empire so many years ago. Now, Happy Oak has been a slave for countless years at this point, so Shortus telling him this, he did not believe him. He thought he was only a rebel telling a lie so that Happy Oak would help him escape. Unfortunately, of course, this meant Shortus would need to attempt to escape the mining empire on his own. He did have a pretty solid plan, of course. He was still so injured from the battle, they assumed that he was still sleeping in the slaves' quarters, attempting to rest and heal. They didn't think that he would even be able to muster up the strength, essentially, to try and escape the same day. Now, of course, there were guards posted at every corner, but he managed to slip past them and make his way towards the armory where he would find his weapons. He quickly brandished his rifle and his trusty cavalry sword and began making his way for the front doors. He found Sandra guarding the door and he quickly thrust his cavalry sword through her gullet, dropping her to the ground. He also had a shootout with Beryl by the helicopter and was easily able to defeat her as well. And as the sun was just now beginning to dawn, Captain Hawthorne and the others ran outside to see what the commotion was, but it was too late for them, as Shortus had already managed to get away. Hawthorne began devising a plan to send out a search party, but with Beryl and Sandra both very injured, there wouldn't be enough people to go, and also enough people to stay to take care of the children, and the wounded as well. Shortus has managed to slip right through their fingers and back into the open arms of the rebels. Shortus had been traveling on foot for a very, very long period of time. He was very hungry, and he was also very tired. He ended up collapsing from exhaustion on the ground, where he would lie for several hours on end until nightfall. However, a search party had already been sent out for him after the rebels who raided the mining empire did not return. A rebel soldier, as well as his daughter Oakley, managed to find him. I would like to thank you guys ever so much for watching this episode of the Mining Empire series. I had a lot of fun filming this one. This one was really fun, just to create and to play and everything. So yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed it just as much as I have. Hopefully you enjoyed it more, of course. But thank you guys ever so much for watching. I love you guys. You're absolutely wonderful, and I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.